Well, hello, everybody. I know there are still a few others that are coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So we have a cool event for you today. Just wanted to say hello and welcome to this behind the scenes event with the Bell Museum. Today we'll go through a journey about the history and legacy of the Bell's dioramas. My name is Steve Davis, and I am the Interim Associate Vice President for Engagement with the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. We're happy today to have this event with the Bell Museum. If you didn't know, UMA has run our own behind the scenes series since 2015. We explored places like WCCO TV, US Bank Stadium, Athletes Village, Faribault Woolen Mill, and the Mall of America, while providing VIP U of M experiences at each. This summer, we adapted to a virtual format of our behind the scenes series due to COVID-19 and recently held an event with the Minnesota Arboretum in partnership with the UMD Alumni Association. That event was recorded, and that recording is available on our website. Today's event will be our 16th behind the scenes event. For more information on the series and to see the other events that we have done, please visit umnalumni.org/BTS. Also, a huge thank you to all of our members who support the behind the scenes series that in turn help to support the events that we do. If you're interested in learning more about the Alumni Association and what membership means, please visit us at umnalumni.org/membership. Our event host, the Bell Museum, is an official Maroon and Gold Rewards partner and offers all UMAA members a discount on membership at the museum. Maroon and Gold Rewards provides exclusive access, offers, and benefits from hand-selected partners offered exclusively through the University of Minnesota Alumni Association for its members. On top of that, we also have several other webinars coming up. We're really doing more things in this virtual space, as you could imagine. On November 19th, there's a Becoming an Entrepreneur panel. On the 10th of December, we're doing a identity in the workplace as an LGBTQ. And then on January 16th is our mini college that will be in a virtual format. You can find this information at umnalumni.org/virtual. Before we get started, just wanted to provide some quick housekeeping things just to kind of keep things going. You all are joining through phone or email or through your computer. If you need to join through phone, here's some more information. The number that you dial, you enter the webinar ID. Also, this event, we will be taking Q&A. Feel free to add your questions as we go throughout the event, and we will address those towards the end of the event. So just so you know, also, this event is being recorded, so if you need to leave for any reason, please know that we will be sharing the recording of this event afterwards. And now I would like to introduce the two people that will take us on this behind the scenes experience with the Bell Museum, Dr. Denise Young and Don Luz. Dr. Denise Young is an executive director of the Bell Museum and has led the Bell Museum since 2016, including the transformation of the museum in its new facility on the St. Paul campus. She holds degrees in early childhood education, educational leadership, and curriculum and instruction, all from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She is a career educator, beginning as a kindergarten teacher in public schools. Don Luce is a curator of events and has worked in the museum world for over 4 decades. He earned a degree in zoology and a master's degree in medical and biological illustration from the University of Michigan. For nearly 2 decades, Don worked plans for a new Bell Museum. The project included the move and restoration of the museum's historic dioramas and the design of the new permanent exhibition galleries. This work culminated in the opening of the new museum on the university's St. Paul campus in the summer of 2018. With that, I will pass it over to Dr. Denise and Don.
Great, Steve, thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. Don and I are thrilled to be with you today, live from the Bell Museum. We have our masks for when we need those and are socially distanced, of course. We are thrilled to be with you today to share stories about the Bell Museum and more specifically about the Bell Museum's nature dioramas. I would like to start our program today by acknowledging that the Bell Museum sits on the sacred and treaty land of the Dakota people, the original caretakers of this land that is now called Minnesota. We all benefit from the Dakota people's knowledge about the land, and we honor this knowledge and the Dakota people. Now, just a little bit of background about the Bell Museum. We are the state's official natural history museum, founded through legislative action in 1872. We're held in trust here at the University of Minnesota. We are proud to be a department of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences. At the Bell Museum, we conduct research, we teach, and we perform a variety of public education and service functions. Don and I are both in this glorious new facility on the St. Paul campus that opened in midsummer of 2018. Our museum includes incredible exhibits about the natural world, a learning landscape, and a planetarium. And the planetarium is the largest and only dedicated public planetarium in the state. We educate people of all ages. I'm seeing several now in the galleries, including school children, families, college students, and adults. In our first full year of being open in this new facility, our attendance went from 38,000 people to 230,000 people. So we're able to reach many more people through this new Bell Museum. Of course, one of the most significant aspects of the Bell Museum is our nature dioramas, and that's where we're going to be focusing the rest of our time today. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn things over to Don Luz, our exhibits curator, who is upstairs in the galleries and ready to take you on a tour of the dioramas. Hi, Don.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody see me? I'm trying to make sure we're okay, good. I'm kind of not seeing this very well. Okay. At any rate, I'm up here in the Minnesota Journeys Gallery, and it is, I think if you come through the museum, most of the exhibits that you'll see are new, but there's some key exhibits that we brought from the old Bell Museum, and these are the dioramas. And so that's one of the things I want to talk about today, is give you a little tour via my cell phone of some of these dioramas. And so I'm going to turn this around, so hopefully you can see this diorama. Now, I'm seeing this in my little corner screen, but I'm going to do my best. What we're looking at here is one of our classic dioramas. It's Lake Pepin diorama. And Lake Pepin is this area of the Mississippi River south of Red Wing, where the river widens out. And we're looking across the lake to the bluffs on the Wisconsin side. And you can actually see Maiden Rock, Wisconsin over there. And we're in the foreground, we're seeing this spit of sand, this point of sand sticking out into the lake. And on this point, we're seeing a big accumulation of birds. And these birds in the background, they're mostly gulls and terns. And on the foreground, they're mostly shorebirds. And these are named because there's a group of birds that are named because, again, they often feed on shorelines, they feed in shallow water, and they're here on this spit of sand, resting and feeding during their spring migration. So it's a particular time, particular place, a real place in the state of Minnesota that's depicted in the diorama. And it tells a whole group of interesting stories. And I'm going to try to, if I can, show you a few of these birds. This one here is a whimbrel. A lot of these shorebirds have kind of a colorful names. A lot of them are based upon the sounds that they make. And if you look at that carefully, you'll see that it has a very long downward curved beak. And these two birds here are Hudsonian godwits. And they also have a thin beak, but slightly upturned. And if you look at the bird that's a little behind there, It's a black-bellied plover. It has kind of a short, stubby beak. And then over on the side here, there's a whole bunch of little sandpipers, sanderlings. These are the birds that you see on the beach. You follow the waves back and forth as they come in. And each of these, even though these are the same sort of a same group of birds, each have these special adaptations of the beaks. Some are long, some are short, some are curved, etc., that are adapted to different niches, different ecological niches in which they feed. And so it's a good example, the diorama is a good example of how this sort of evolution happens, how these animals adapt to different environments. And so you can tell, and this is just one of many stories that you can tell with this diorama, but unlike kind of a, what you might call a didactic display, the diorama gives you this in this beautiful setting. And so that it's really dependent upon the artistic quality of this to have the visitor feel like they're actually in the space and really making observations of nature. And so it, and one of the artists that worked on this, in fact, this is one of the first dioramas that were made in the old Church Street building in 1940. And the artist, Francis Lee Jacques, and you'll hear more about him in a little bit, had this amazing ability to merge the foreground and the background together. And it's one of the things that allows the diorama to create this sense of illusion. And so you can see how he has used the lines of the waves, the lines in the sand, the wet sand and the dry sand, and the rocks and the debris to pull your eye from the foreground to the background. And so dioramas are really a combination of both art and science in order to give people this appreciation of nature. And you often also have a very strong conservation message. A lot of these birds are long distance migrants. They'll spend much of the winter, in southern parts of South America, in some cases. And on their migration north in the spring, they need places like this beach to be able to rest and feed. And so it's really important to preserve these places in order to preserve this diversity of life. So with that kind of introduction, I'm going to switch over to a short video, which will, again, give you a little bit more background about the dioramas.
Windows to Nature, Minnesota's Dioramas is a TPT Partnerships co-production with the Bell Museum at the University of Minnesota.
For generations, the Bell Museum has served as an important front door to the people of Minnesota. Literally thousands of young people have come through as part of growing up in Minnesota.
The dioramas are a window in time. They really present all sorts of opportunities for us in interpreting Minnesota's natural environment.
Most of us will not be able to visit all of these places. Every corner of Minnesota is depicted here, but we should all care about all of these places.
I think the dioramas are great for observation. There's so many small details in the diorama that unless you actually are paying attention and observing and looking at them that you're not going to see.
The great thing about our diorama is it combines art and science in such interesting ways.
These aren't going to have less value over time. They're going to have more value.
These dioramas are amazing works of art and cultural history. We're now moving them to a new building. They need to be starting to address the needs for future generations.
It's an important step to preserve memory. And I think that this particular project is invaluable.
Okay, so here we are back at Lake Pepin, and we're going to move inland from Lake Pepin. We're going to move to the west. And so I'm moving through the gallery here, and you'll see another diorama. And so if we were to move from Lake Pepin, go west, you would get into a section of Minnesota that was called the Big Woods. And this is what an upland forest, deciduous forest, would look like at about the same time of year, early spring. And so this is one of the cool things I think about these dioramas. You can kind of move around the habitats of the state just by walking in a few steps, and you make these comparisons that would be very difficult to actually do in nature. And so what's happening here in this woodland in the early spring, there are also birds that are migrating here. And I'm hoping you can see this little warbler, that's a blackbirdian warbler. And it's stopping here on its migration. It's going to nest a little bit further, probably nest in northern Minnesota and throughout the boreal forest. But it's coming here just as these leaves on the trees are beginning to leaf out. And at that time, there are also insects that are beginning to hatch out. And those insects, of course, would eat the tree leaves. And these migrating birds are gleaning these insects off the leaves, feeding on them, restoring their food so they can continue their migration. But the other thing that's happening on the ground, on the forest floor, all of these woodland wildflowers are in bloom. They've leafed out already. And not only have they leafed out, but they've bloomed, and they're probably going to set seed pretty quickly. And so these are what are often called ephemeral wildflowers. And they have to grow, put out their leaves, and collect energy from the sunlight while they still have sunlight, because pretty soon, once the leaves on the trees leaf out, it's going to be too dark. There's not going to be much sun and sunlight reaching the forest floor. And so that's another story that can be told in this diorama. This whole sequence of phenological events, these changes with the season that happen. And when you look here, I hope you can see these there's a female wood duck and a whole group of ducklings. And you go, what's going on there? And if you look up into the tree, you'll see this hollow. And right there is little ducklings about to come out. So these wood ducks actually nest in trees, nest in tree cavities. And so that wood duck has been in there incubating the eggs. They're hatching out. She'll call them out. When they're all out, they will head down to the lake. And so again, this is another diorama created by the background by artist Jaques. And again, one of the techniques he used, again, to pull your eye from the foreground to the background, is this little trail that heads down to the lake. And so one of the things that I think is one of the things that's so amazing about our dioramas is that when you look at all of these plants and animals, how accurately they have been done and how accurately particularly the plants have been simulated. You can learn all your plant identification by looking at these plant models. And a lot of people ask how these dioramas were done. How were they made? And almost all of these plants are actually made out of wax. And so what I want to do now is I'm going to do a little PowerPoint where I can show you some slides where you can kind of see some of this process, a little history, a little background on the dioramas, but also some of the process that went through to making these dioramas, and then also the process that we went through in order to move them and restore them for the new Bell Museum. So we're going to start a PowerPoint now.
Okay, so I just want to show you a few slides, give you a little background about dioramas, a little history, talk a little bit about some of the people that made these dioramas, and then I want to talk about this process that we went through to move the dioramas and restore the dioramas for the new museum. Now, when you think about dioramas, you might think that they were old-fashioned, but they actually were a dramatic change to the way nature was displayed in museums. If you look back to the 19th century, This is a good example of a museum from the 19th century, and museums are just filled with display cases, filled with specimens, arranged by the classification order. But these displays told the visitor nothing about how these plants and animals lived in the natural environment, what behaviors they displayed, how they interacted with each other. And so dioramas were an attempt to put nature kind of back together and create a display that was beautiful and relatable, but also told these stories about how plants and animals lived in nature. So our beaver diorama is a really good example. You see this beaver family, they're cutting trees, they're feeding, you can see the dam that they built, you see the pond, their lodge, etc. You can see the impact that they made on the environment. And so you have all these ecological relationships that you can talk about with this diorama. And then, of course, there's also conservation message here as well, in that beaver had actually been pretty much trapped out of the state of Minnesota. And in 1900, they were reintroduced to Itasca State Park. And so that was one of the first examples of this reintroduction of an extirpated species. And so this the Bell Museum was actually one of the early adapters of dioramas. And this beaver diorama was one of our earliest ones. It was built from 1917 to 1919, 100 years ago. And it's still a phenomenally beautiful and well-constructed diorama. So that was, again, even though we were a small museum, throughout time, people were really concerned about having the quality of these dioramas being first rate. So some of the key people that worked on these dioramas, the background painter on many of them is an artist named Francis Lee Jaques, and he worked at the American Museum of Natural History in New York from the 1920s through the 1940s, and is considered to be one of the best diorama artists of all time. And he also was from Minnesota. So when the building in Church Street was built, he was brought in to paint new dioramas there. The other key person was Walter Breckenridge, and he joined the museum in the 1920s as a taxidermist and preparator, got his master's and PhD at the University of Minnesota. And by the 1940s, he was probably one of the leading naturalists and conservationists in the state of Minnesota. But he also was an incredible, skilled preparator, museum preparator. He did a lot of the foreground work, such as mounting these wolves, casting all the rocks for the wolf diorama, etc. But when you look at one of these dioramas, like the Big Woods diorama here, and you say, how was this made? Again, how was this made? And one of the key things, one of the things I want to talk about is how the leaves and the plants were made, because this is a very special process. And these were all made out of wax, and they're made, every leaf, there were molds made of the leaves and plaster, top and bottom. Wax was colored and then heated, melted, poured into these molds. You got kind of blobs of wax with the impression of leaf. These were cut out. The serrations were different on different species, so they had little cutters that were customized to the serration patterns. So an incredible amount of handwork went into each of these. The different leaves were soldered together. This is all basswood, young basswood leaves that are coming out on that tree. And the care that they took to make these accurate and beautiful means that we can now learn our plant identification by looking at the plants in these dioramas. And so when it came time to move the dioramas, this wax was a great way of simulating plant tissue, but it's also quite fragile. So this incredible amount of care was taken to carefully disassemble all of these plant materials and so preserve them for the new museum. And so each of these plant models was taken out, numbered, so they could be put back together again in the right place, and packed up to be moved to the museum. And of course, they were they're also all clean as well in the process. And in fact, this is one of the key things that a lot of the birds and mammals over time had faded because of the lighting in the dioramas. So all that color had to be restored in the process of moving and restoring the dioramas. Now, once the foregrounds were out, the backgrounds were another major challenge. There was no way we could peel the canvas off the walls without damaging them. These big plaster, cement, steel walls, big curved walls, we would have liked to move them as whole units, but of course they were locked into the structure of the building. So they had to be cut into sections in order to get them out. And in order to move them without cracking them, which of course would ruin them, this big heavy steel framework was built to support them during the move. And then once they were packed up, wrapped up, we had to cut holes in the sides of the building on both floors, first and second floor. And then these big sections of the background murals were rolled out onto a platform, picked up by a crane, put on trucks, and brought to the new museum. And of course, a lot of the sections and big mounts of the foreground were also taken out of the museum the same way. And then once the background walls were in the new museum, they had to be welded back together precisely, exactly in the same orientation. And then the big cuts were filled in, and the strips of canvas that were taken out were glued back in place. And then the very fine cut lines were filled and recolored to make sure that the murals were restored to their exact appearance before the move. And then once the pieces of the foreground were put in place, all those wax plants were put back in there as close as possible to the same location. You can see the photographs in the lower right that were used where we numbered all locations to put them back in place. And so these dioramas were, in many ways, we made some improvements. For example, how the water was simulated is different in many of the dioramas. Just they were advances in how dioramas are made over the past 7,500 years. And we also have better lighting and better glass. So in many ways, these dioramas now look better than they did when they were first built. The other change that we made was how the dioramas are presented in the gallery itself. This is a picture of the old Bell Museum. There are nice wood paneled walls, nice wood paneled walls. But again, the dioramas are just windows sort of in a hallway. And so we wanted to change that presentation. So the new Bell Museum, these dioramas are presented in an environment that's much more engaging for our visitors. Yes, people can still admire the dioramas, get sort of absorbed into observing them, but they also have other hands-on interactives are nearby. There's better paneling, there's sound scapes in many of these areas, and the imagery of the dioramas of the environments that they would be found in are brought out into the visitor space. In many cases, we took some of the smaller dioramas without their backgrounds and brought them out into, again, the visitor space, sort of having a sense of transparency, more of an immersive sense in the gallery, to give people a sense that there really are more suggestion, I guess, of walking through nature, being in this environment that we're talking about in the museum. And one of the key features that I thought was really very successful, we have these touchscreens that at each diorama where you can identify all the plants and animals. There's a little introductory video that you can experience. There's some search games that you can play around with. But there's also on about 4 of them, we worked with a local school where kids are taught Ojibwe and Dakota language. And we had the students give tours of the dioramas in Ojibwe or a Dakota language. And so it's one of the features, again, that you can experience when you visit the new Bell Museum.
Okay, so we're back here at the Big Woods Diorama. And one of the things I thought I would do, since we were talking about these plants, is I am going to move over here, and I brought a few artifacts out from the past to look at. And one of the things that they did in making these dioramas, they often made little models of the dioramas. So this is a little model of the Cormorant diorama that is not on display right now, but it's just an example of the models that they would make. And that was really important to kind of work out how the foreground and the background were going to match up and tell the story that they wanted to make. And then I also have, hope you can see that, a couple of these plaster molds that they used to make the leaves. These were actually water lily leaves, and this is a top and bottom of the mold. And you can see how they would interlock with each other to make the impression of the leaf. And I've got a few here. These are some maple leaves that were done in process, and they have just been, they've been cast, they've been cut out, but they haven't been colored yet. Okay, so you can still see the wire that's in there, and that will be hidden. And they would use an airbrush. Here's the airbrush to paint the leaves, because of course the leaves vary in color. The bottom leaf is often different color than the top of the leaf. And then for a lot of the little flowers, they would use these, they would stamp them out. They'd put wax in paper and then stamp them out using these metal stamps that were custom made for each of the different flowers or leaves. And then we've got a little selection here of some of the leaves that were, these are kind of ready to go, but they were extras that we kind of preserved and saved. And you can kind of see that in detail. They're really remarkable how lifelike they are. And then even this is just, they even of course had a special way of making grass blades. And so these are some extra grass blades put in that old cigar box, but they actually built a special machine that would cut a grass blade and put a midrib in it. And they would use different color sheets of vinyl to simulate grass blades. So at any rate, that just gives you a little bit of background. And now I'm going to give you just sort of a general tour of some of the other exhibits here. Now you can see as we move around, this is the one of three main sections in the Web of Life gallery, or section of the gallery. And this is the Big Woods, Big Rivers section. So we've seen Lake Pepin. We've kind of gone uphill to look at the Big Woods. And now in the Swan exhibit, we are just south of the Twin Cities on the backwaters of the Minnesota River. And this is an area that's now part of the Minnesota River National Wildlife Refuge. And the swans, again, it's also, again, early spring. The swans are here as a migratory stop on their migration to the tundra where they would nest. And there's also large numbers of other waterfowl shown in the background. And one of the things that these dioramas are really good for is that they are kind of a time capsule. So this area today, it's part of this National Wildlife Refuge. It's actually just south of the airport and the Mall of America. So if you were to look at these hills that you see in the background today, you would see buildings there, Bloomington. You would see planes coming off from the airport. But you see here in 1940, there were actually farm fields up there. And most of that bluff is wooded now. And this, we actually went back and tried to visit some of these locations and photograph what they are today. And so this is, it's interesting. This is kind of mud flats, as you can see here now. A lot of that sediment in 1940 was washing off of farm fields, which of course are not there anymore, since that's all urban environment. But there's a lot more nutrients in this water from a lot of other runoff, both from the urban environment and from the agricultural environment upstream. And so the vegetation here is quite different. And so again, that's one of the advantages of having these dioramas. It's just kind of time capsules of recording change over time. And so if we continue, we sort of made this as if you were kind of, again, could be a walk through the state of Minnesota. We're going to end this up at the very end of where the Mississippi River leaves Minnesota. And so this is the Swallowtail Kite diorama. I actually think this is one of the most beautiful of our dioramas. It's not as big as the others. It was again painted by Jaques, and it just it depicts the southeastern Minnesota, this bluff country. So you're standing up on this bluff, looking out over the river. He recreated kind of the spring flood scene as it would have occurred before a lot of the dams and dredging that would have taken place on the Mississippi River. And it depicts one of these species that's kind of an interest, one of swallowtail kites. If you want to see swallowtail kites today, sometimes you can see them in the very sort of Gulf Coast of the United States and in Central America. I think they're one of the most beautiful birds in terms of how they fly. And there are records of these birds nesting in Minnesota. And over the past, 200 or 150 years, they have completely disappeared from these big river forests where they used to nest in the past. And so it's an example of a species that, again, has changed over time. Used to be here and is no longer here. So I think we are about a point where we can start talking about taking some questions. Am I right on that? But that gives you a tour, a little bit of a tour of this part of the gallery. And shows you a little bit, again, maybe we should look at you can see here in that PowerPoint, it talked a little bit about how we brought some of these smaller dioramas out so that you can walk around them. 2 minutes, okay, we have a little more time, good. I'm gonna show you a few more things. And the other thing we wanted to show here that you couldn't have seen in the old building is we brought out some of the collections that you would see, because the museum has the university has phenomenal collections of this diversity of life in Minnesota. And so these are just a few of the insects that you would also find in this big woods environment. Mostly in this case, a lot of the insects and mammals that would be living in the soil layer in this area. So we've tried to include a variety of different experiences with the dioramas themselves.
All right. Well, that was awesome. Thank you, Don, for taking us on this amazing experience of a tour through the Bell Museum. I appreciate everybody's patience with technology. We definitely wanted to give you a different way of going on a tour through a virtual process. So I appreciate Don, being the curator and leader in that. And we'll start to address some questions. One question that came in that's really themed around a lot of the move of the dioramas. Could you talk a little bit more about the amount of work that it took with that? How many people were involved? who was involved, the composition of taking that from the old museum to the new one, and also possibly you talked about the wax that is used to kind of build most of the items, but what about the animals? Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Okay, great question, great questions. Yeah, this is one of the things we were, of course, we were thinking a lot for quite a long time about this move. It's one of the things that often kept me awake at night. If we were going to move this museum, how are we going to move, and particularly what we used to call the maple basswood forest, so Big Woods diorama, all those wax plants, and how are we going to handle those and preserve them and move them. And one of the things, I guess one of the advantages of having this be kind of a long process, and we took why it took so long to get the funding and do all the planning, and is that we were able to really identify key people that would really the best in the country anywhere who could do this work. And so we put together a phenomenal team, some local people, some people nationally, and really specialists. There still are people who build dioramas today and have been trained in some of these techniques of using wax, although most of them today are using plastics instead of wax, things like that. But they still have this really deep appreciation for how these were built in the past, and a deep appreciation for the dioramas themselves. And so they really were a dedicated team to making this work as best as it could. So there probably were about 5 different teams that worked on different aspects of this move. People who were just specializing in the foreground. One person was just really specializing in the plants. Another one was specializing in restoring the mammals and the birds and restoring the color. And then there were teams who were working on disassembling the foreground, packing that up, doing a lot of packing of it. There was also a team that was focused on the physical moving of the background walls, and a team of art conservators who were handling the protection of the paintings and the cleaning and restoration of the paintings. And they again were a local team that art conservation group right here in town.
Great. A follow-up question on the dioramas. You mentioned that there were possibly some in storage. There was a question in regards to, what are those in storage? Were some of the dioramas not transferred over from the other? And are you all planning on adding new dioramas to the Bell?
Okay, yeah, this is a difficult issue because, again, we wanted to have a variety of experiences in the museum. The Old Bell Museum, you went through, and no matter, we had these beautiful dioramas, but it was just dioramas. There really wasn't anything else you could see with the dioramas. And so in order to make room for other kinds of experiences, we didn't have room for all the dioramas. And not all the dioramas were of this first rate as the ones that we moved. So we moved all of the really first rate ones. All of the large Jaques dioramas painted by Jaques were preserved and moved. And the smaller ones that we could not use right away, we have preserved and stored. And we do have plans for hopefully to bring some of those out periodically in the future.
Great. Another question about the Old Bell Museum. What has happened with that? What is currently going on? People are asking what happened with that one?
Yep. Don, I'll take that one and give you a chance to catch your breath. So yes, what a beautiful building. I believe the question is about the building on Church Street, Church and University, which was a wonderful home to the Bell Museum for over 70 years. That building is a building that belongs to the University of Minnesota. And there's a process that is in place that the university has for determining use of buildings. And that building is certainly one that is being considered for what its future purpose or use will become. Those of you who are familiar with the building know that there's a large auditorium on the building or as part of the building. And that auditorium was in use and continues to be in use for university classes to this day. So even as we were closing the museum to be able to start the move of the dioramas and then opening over here, that auditorium has been in use the entire time. And so I think we'll all just have to wait and see what the next great purpose is for that beautiful building. Thanks for the question.
Great. Another question came in about more of the general layout of the new Bell Museum. I know we've seen most of the dioramas, but could you explain how things are shaped in a new building?
Sure. Don, do you want to take that one or would you like me to do it?
Yeah, well, what I'll do is I'll talk about the rest of this gallery, and then I think maybe I'll let Denise talk about the other parts of the museum. And so, yeah, one of the things that I thought was really interesting in this whole process, and I found really rewarding, was that the museum merged with the Planetarium Society of Minnesota. And so with this new museum, we brought in a lot more content that we didn't have in the old Bell Museum: astronomy, geology, earth sciences that we hadn't been able to really do in the old Bell. And so when it came time to kind of think about how we're going to present these topics to the public, some of the typical way, well, one of the ways that museums would do is to have a gallery that was devoted to each of these topics and have exhibits there that would be great. You'd explore those topics, but they weren't necessarily related to the other galleries. And so what we really wanted to try to do is come up with a scheme where we could tie all of these different aspects from astronomy, geology, evolution, paleontology, climate change, to the diversity of life, to the different habitats and ecological functions of that you find here in Minnesota, different habitats and biomes, all into, and as well as a look into the future, all together in one storyline, one narrative. And so we tried to set up kind of a walk through time and space, starting at the edge of the universe, zooming down to Earth, talking about why the Earth, what are the aspects of the Earth that allow it to support life. There are side trips you can take searching for exoplanets elsewhere in the galaxy. You can do a little side trip and to looking at, what are the elements, where the elements come from that make up life. And then you follow from the original life forward until you get to a point where you're walking through the biomes of the state of Minnesota. And we actually have a little storyline even there, where as you come through, the human impact on these environments becomes a bigger part of the story as you work through the gallery. And eventually, there's the last section is today, humans now have probably making a bigger impact on the future of our planet than any other, or certainly any other organism. And really the future of our planet is really depending on what we do. And so a lot of scientists are now calling this the Anthropocene. This is the age of the Earth, where humans are really having this amazing impact, changing climate, changing a lot of the other features, just even how much soil and erosion is taking place, water cycles, et cetera, really making major changes in the ecosystem of our planet. And so we really wanted to emphasize how, we are really determining this future of the planet, and getting our visitors to kind of hopefully take some of the things that they learned, some of the principles they learned in the rest of the journey, and try to use those to think about how we can create a sustainable future.
So the part of the museum that Don was just describing is the entire second floor of the museum is the Minnesota Journeys Gallery. There's an entire first floor of the museum too, that includes the planetarium, the Whitney Elizabeth Macmillan Planetarium, again, with all digital technology that allows us to bring current data sets about the night sky and the solar system and the universe to Minnesota, to the museum and to the visitors to the planetarium. There's a special exhibition gallery that changes in regular fashion, seasonally. Right now, we've got a great immersive exhibition called Audubon Animated. And so that, again, that gallery changes regularly. And then I'm sitting and broadcasting from the Collections Cove at the Touch and See Lab. The Touch and See space has been a very important space and innovation in natural history museums all over the country and the world, in that you can come into the space and interact in a hands-on way with the education collections that are here. We also have a live animal collection that you can interact with. And then we're also grateful in this new location on the northern edge of the St. Paul campus to be on a 5-acre space that allowed us to build a learning landscape where, again, we could use the landscape and the special features of the architecture of the building to educate people about our relationship to the land, as well as how we can create a more sustainable future. So there's a lot of wonderful things we brought over from the previous location of the Bell Museum, and then incredible new features as well. And we hope you'll come see it.
Great. We'll do 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap this up. The next question kind of talks about more of the preservation of some of the exhibits and the dioramas. Could you talk a little bit more about the maintenance that is required? I believe you had one of the oldest dioramas was in 1915. How do you preserve that?
Yeah, this is I used to joke about, when you look at these like the Big Woods diorama, and visitors asking who gets in there to water all those plants, but they really the major preservation is sealing them up as tightly as possible. So that keeps dust out, keeps insects out. Those are the kind of 2 really major threats to dioramas over time. The other big threat is light. And so how much light is put into the diorama, and particularly how much UV light, ultraviolet light, because that's what was causing the mounts and the birds, the mammals to fade over time. And so one of the things we changed is the lighting system. So we not only do we have, so they're all lit with LED lights now, which are way more efficient. So we're using much, much less electricity than we did in the old Bell, but they also produce no UV light. And so this is going to really help to preserve these over time and prevent that fading from happening in the future. The other thing we thought we did that was really nice, I think I mentioned a little bit in the PowerPoint, was that the glass, they now have coated glass that really reduces reflections. And one of the things for many, many years, natural history museums felt really frustrated because they had these exhibits behind glass, and visitors didn't like that. And they tried their best to kind of open these up and create open dioramas. And well, the insects and the dust got in there, and it was a real hazard. So what we did is we used these special glass, which was only manufactured in one place in North America, and which has these coatings that really reduce the reflection. So when you're looking at these, it's almost as if there's no glass there at all. So that's one of the things I was very insistent upon, using this non-reflective glass. So that's, again, still preserved, still sealed up, That's the most important aspect. But change the light so we don't have that UV light that's fading things in the future.
Great. Well, last question to wrap things up that kind of gives you all a chance to talk a little bit more about the Bell Museum in today's world right now. Given COVID-19 and people are, we're still through this pandemic, how has the Bell adjusted to, letting people come in and do tours? And once this pandemic is lifted, will you be looking for more volunteers? Because it seems like you have a crowd of people who want to help.
Yes, great. Thank you. Thanks for that question. Yes, we did temporarily close the museum from mid-March until mid-July. We have safely reopened. And of course, as we know, there are science-based things that we can do to keep each other safe. So masks are a requirement. We're doing extra cleaning. We're really paying attention to social distancing, making it easier and more possible for people to sanitize their hands and those sorts of things, which we're all becoming increasingly familiar with. We also have an outdoor learning landscape, which provides an opportunity for people to safely be in the museum. And so safety procedures and schedules and all of the details are on our website, bellmuseum.umn.edu. We also realize that not everyone feels comfortable or is able to go out right now and enjoy a museum or feel safe to do that. As we had to close the museum in mid-March, we started turning our attention more and more to virtual programs, sort of like we're doing here today. And again, if you go to our website, if you like our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram or Twitter, you will see advertisements about live programs that take place here at the museum, or we've turned our star parties virtual. And we've got a lot of star party event happening next week in particular with a statewide star party and partners all over Minnesota working together to educate about the night sky. But we have a variety of programs every week that are available online from the comfort of your own home or desk. So there are many, many ways to engage with the Bell Museum right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for the time today to go through this tour and give people a chance to see how the Bell Museum is looking digitally. I'm pretty sure hopefully when things are lifted, people are even now can start to come and take a visit of the Bell Museum. But once again, thank you, Denise, and thank you, Don, for your time of leading us through this behind the scenes tour. Thank you for everyone taking your time on this Friday to participate. I hope that you got a lot of great information out of this. This is being recorded, so you will have a video sent to you after this event for those who had to leave early. But yeah, once again, thank you once again for your time. Hope you enjoy the rest of you guys this weekend and go visit the Bell Museum when you get a chance.
Yeah,
Great.
please.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.